Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're venturing into the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a region steeped in history, incredible natural beauty, but also, as our sources reveal, a surprising number of, chilling and unexplained occurrences. We've gathered a really fascinating collection of accounts, everything from personal stories to historical tales, even some enduring legends. Our mission today is to unpack these stories, try to pull out the most compelling bits of knowledge and insight, and maybe explore why these unsettling tales, continue to resonate. Get ready for a journey that might just make you look at the woods a little differently.
Indeed. And what's really striking, I think, is how these narratives, some are personal, some collective, some feel almost ancient, how they seem to weave together. They paint this picture of a landscape holding these profound, often quite dark secrets. It really makes you wonder what unseen histories or maybe forces linger just beyond our common understanding. How do they still affect things?
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. We begin in a place that sounds, almost peaceful on the surface. Grapefield, Virginia. Tiny town. Just 4 streets, nestled by a creek about a mile off the Appalachian Trail. Sounds like a Hallmark card, right? But for the narrator's grandpa, it was anything but idyllic. He got out the first chance he got. And it wasn't just the Great Depression forcing him out. Grapefield, it turns out, has this truly dark past.
You're absolutely right. And the troubles in Grapefield, they started way before the Depression. They're rooted really deep in the pre-Civil War era. The town was actually quite prosperous back then, mostly employed by 2 big plantation families at opposite ends of the holler. One owned slaves, the other family were staunch abolitionists. And what's kind of striking is that for a while, this really fraught arrangement somehow managed to function.
Yeah, it works just fine, apparently, for a bit.
Yeah.
But, as tensions started mounting across the country, especially with the violence spilling over in Kansas, those polite discussions just stopped completely. By the time Fort Sumter was fired upon, arguments in Grapefield weren't settled with words anymore. They were settled with bullets. The abolitionists might have had the moral high ground, but the slave owners just had significantly more cash.
And that wealth, while it allowed them to hire these unsavory types for protection, quote unquote, it escalated quickly into outright violence, intimidation, even murder. A lot of the abolitionists were hanged or they just fled north. This situation, however, didn't last forever. The Confederate Graybacks, they eventually lost the war.
Okay, and here's where the story takes a really disturbing turn. Once the Federals arrived, the slave owners, somehow, they managed to get ownership of their plantations back. The sources don't really say how, but without the free labor, or the abolitionist farmers who'd been driven out or killed, things are just never the same. The original plantation head, who was described as cruel but at least competent, he was replaced by his eldest son. And this son was apparently a fool, a tyrant, and a drunk. He might not have technically owned slaves anymore, but he treated people and their families like property. And the account says he was a little too fresh with Grapefield's women folk.
Yeah, that kind of behavior, it just lit a fuse. After one man's wife claimed violation, the town basically decided enough is enough. But instead of, say, a quick hanging, what the mob did was chillingly methodical. They nailed doors and windows shut on the plantation house. They shot anyone who tried to escape. And that included maids, cooks, nannies who were just trapped inside.
Then they doused the entire house in something flammable and set it on fire. Apparently, they were cheering until they heard the screams. Screams of women and children coming from the upstairs windows. That's when they realized the full horror of what they'd done. One man tried to get in to rescue them, but it was just far too late. And the whole thing had to be staged to look like an accident to outsiders. Not out of conscience, mind you, but just to keep up appearances.
And while the authorities, at least officially, seemed convinced it was an accident, the truth eventually leaked out. The account describes it like a darkness just seeped into Grapefield that never went away. The local economy collapsed. Fear and suspicion just became the norm. Even 40 years later, when things had started to heal a little bit, people still talked about a curse. This collective guilt, it led to widespread drinking, broken homes, just anguish and misery everywhere. That was the town the narrator's grandpa grew up in.
And that curse, or whatever you want to call it, it seemed to manifest in this really terrifying way later on. In 1934, after Prohibition ended, a hunter named Hiram Carter stumbled into a local speakeasy. He was clearly shaken, like to his core. He said he'd seen something in the woods, described it as too skinny to be a bear, too big to be a dog. It was moving so fast it scared him half to death. He swore it actually stalked him back to his truck. People initially just brushed him off, thought he was just telling tall tales.
But what's remarkable is how quickly that skepticism shifted. Just 7 days later, Hiram's story wasn't a joke anymore. It was the talk of the town, and people were taking it much more seriously. By the time the narrator's grandpa was growing up, that old plantation land had been abandoned for almost 50 years. It was overgrown, spooky, just unsettling. Kids were warned to stay away, but, well, kids. They explored it anyway.
And for one little girl, ignoring those warnings almost cost her life. She and her younger sister were out exercising their beagle puppy on the plantation grounds, and the dog suddenly started growling viciously. Then the older girl saw it, this monster, creeping on all fours through the trees. It then stood up on its hind legs, watched them for a moment, then dropped back down all fours and started chasing them. Her description is horrifying. Huge, with shaggy hair all over its body, but none at all around its muzzle, which appeared horribly misshapen and deformed.
Again, the initial thought was maybe a mangy bear or something diseased, but when this thing started actively hunting children, the town knew they had to do something. They sent out the best hunter, a guy named Rufus Robinson, with his Australian shepherd. Days passed, only the dog came back. It hobbled back to Rufus's cabin, then just lay down on his neighbor's porch. The account says, almost like it knew that Rufus wasn't coming home. Rufus was never seen again.
So a hunting party of 6 men was quickly put together. Within 24 hours, they managed to lure the creature out using fresh meat as bait. It attacked them fiercely, almost took one man's arm off before they just shot it, repeatedly, until it finally stopped moving. But when they got a closer look at what they'd killed, deep in those woods, it was far more disturbing than any animal. The account says, quite plainly, it wasn't any kind of bear. It was a man.
His body was absolutely filthy, caked in dirt and mud. He had these hideous webs of burned scars all over his face, his chest, his shoulders. It completely robbed him of any normal human appearance. His spine was sort of arched, his hands and feet were heavily calloused, and his nails had become like sharp, filth-encrusted claws. And the town doctor, who'd actually treated the original plantation family years ago, he recognized him instantly. Yeah. This was one of the plantation owner's sons.
Turns out, on the night of the fire, one of the mob members, who was stationed by the east wing of the house, he saw a boy scrambling out of a small cellar grate. He raised his rifle to shoot, but then he saw it was just a child, already scorched and blistering from the fire, and he couldn't do it. He figured the boy wouldn't survive more than a day anyway, so he just let him go into the woods.
The implications are just chilling. Nobody knew how he possibly survived for decades out there, alone. Most people suspected that the grief and the trauma had just driven him completely insane, and his fear of other people kept him feral. But how did he get so comfortable running on all fours? That part's deeply strange. Some people speculated maybe he was born different, treated like a monster his whole life, so he eventually became one. Others thought he just slowly lost his humanity over the years, learning to hunt and run like an animal. The narrator's grandparents confirmed this whole story. They said his death was really just another in a long line of murders that never saw justice, and that was the final straw that made them leave Grapefield for good.
Yeah, the grandfather's father apparently put it very starkly. So the boy never really survived the plantation fire that night. Killing him meant finishing off a murder that started 30 or 40 years earlier. And that's why people say Grapefield is cursed. Not necessarily because there's some, evil spirit lurking around, but because the actions of those who came before condemn those who came after. They essentially have all the same blood on their hands. It makes you think, can the weight of past atrocities truly haunt a place for generations?
It's a powerful, disturbing thought. That Grapefield story, it definitely casts a long shadow.
It really does. Okay, so moving from those kinds of historical burdens, let's shift gears a bit. Let's delve into a tale from Clinch Valley, eastern Tennessee. This one is more personal, a tragic, horrifying story of love twisted into something truly macabre. It's known locally as the story of the girl who married a corpse. Her name was Willa May Martin. She was married young, just 17, in a shotgun wedding to a man named Alden. They moved into a small home, and for a little while, they were actually happy.
But then tragedy struck. Willa May lost their baby halfway through her pregnancy. And Alden, he never forgave her. He blamed her entirely for the miscarriage, accused her of not taking proper care of herself. His way of dealing with the grief was drinking. And when he drank, he beat Willa May. Terribly.
Yeah. Her only bit of relief, her only solace, was Alden's job. He was an oil driller down in Texas, worked 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So it was like 2 weeks of relative peace, followed by 2 weeks of absolute hell. While he was away, Alden asked his brother, Silas Martin, to check in on Willa May. Make sure she was okay, do any man's work around the house. Silas did that, but he also grew genuinely curious about why Willa May always seemed so sad, so melancholic.
And when Willa May finally realized that Silas wasn't just spying for Alden, that he was actually concerned, she just broke down, told him everything. The beatings, the constant berating, how her life felt like it was barely worth living. Silas comforted her, and, well, the account says one thing led to another and they ended up falling in love.
So after, violating the sanctity of marriage, the clandestine couple knew they couldn't keep living this secret life. Willa May had to end her marriage to Alden. She waited until he left for his next trip to Texas, packed her bags, and planned her escape with Silas. She wrote Alden this absolutely scathing letter, told him what a piece of trash he was, how she never really loved him, and how she'd see him in hell. Brutal stuff. Then she took a wagon to Bean Station, about 12 miles away, where Silas was supposed to be waiting.
There was just one snag. Silas couldn't collect his final wages until the next day. So Willa May checked into a cheap hotel for the night, and Silas promised he'd meet her at the train station first thing in the morning. They'd have enough cash to start a whole new life out in California.
But the next morning, as Willa May walked towards the train platform, she saw a figure she thought was Silas. He was wearing Silas's favorite felt hat and jacket. But as she got closer, the figure turned around, and she saw it wasn't Silas at all. It was her husband, Alden Martin, wearing his brother's clothes.
Oh, the cruel twist of fate here is it's agonizing. Turns out Alden's services were no longer needed down in Texas, so he came home early, much earlier than expected. He caught an overnight train back to Tennessee, arriving in Bean Station just hours after Willa May had checked into her hotel. So while she was dreaming of this new life, he was already back home, reading that both barrels letter she left him. And the really chilling detail. Because Willa May assumed he wouldn't be back for another 11 days, she told him exactly what she and Silas were planning, and when they were planning it.
Alden just lifted his brother's jacket, showed her he had a gun tucked in his belt. He told Willa May he'd spare her life, but only if she rode with him back to Silas's house first, for a heartfelt apology. His words. He sent her bags back home, pulled her onto his horse, and rode towards Silas's place. As her lover's little home came into view, Willa May apparently tried to jump off the horse, screaming and crying, but Alden was stronger. He dragged her into the yard and forced his hysterical wife to look up at Silas's body as it hung by the neck from the beams of his porch.
Alden's words then were just bone-chilling. Go and remember you did this, not me. Then he just rode back into Bean Station and surrendered himself to the sheriff, told him exactly where to find Silas's body. He even added that since Silas was an orphan and unmarried, there was nobody they really needed to inform about his death.
But when the deputies went out to Silas's house to collect the body, it was gone, vanished. And Willa May, she was never seen again either. Silas Martin's body stayed missing until the night after Alden was hanged for the murder. That night, someone just abandoned a cart right in front of the sheriff's office. The next morning, they pulled back the sheet covering the cart, and there was Silas Martin's body. But it was, quote, embalmed and pristine with a wedding band wrapped around one of his old dead fingers.
So who embalmed Silas's body? And why deliver it back with a wedding band? Willa May's fate is a complete mystery. But that final act, the reappearance of the body, preserved like that with the ring, it suggests someone else was involved, a final, deliberate, macabre gesture. It adds this horrifying layer to an already devastating story of betrayal and revenge. It hints at some hidden hand ensuring a grim kind of justice, or maybe just a twisted remembrance. It's deeply unsettling.
Yeah, absolute chilling. Okay, shifting again. The Appalachians, as we know, are just rich with fascinating, often unsettling myths and legends. Many people have heard of things like the Mothman, maybe the Flatwoods Monster, but our sources today dive into some lesser known, but I think incredibly compelling accounts.
Right. And one of the most persistent, though maybe less famous legends comes from parts of southern and eastern Appalachia. It's the legend of the moon-eyed people. They're described as these sort of imp-like humanoids, maybe around 4 feet tall. They have pale, almost ghostly bodies and these large, slightly bulbous eyes. Supposedly, they're mostly harmless and only come out at night, mainly because they're very sensitive to light, but also because they have this deep fear of humanity.
Now, to most people, that probably sounds like quaint folklore, right? Something you'd tell around a campfire for a spook. But there might be a surprising degree of, well, potential truth rooted in this legend. Our sources take us way back to 1782. Back then, North Georgia and parts of the Appalachians were Cherokee Nation territory. The governor at the time, John Sevier, visited the Cherokee chief Oconostota, who was about 90 years old then. And the chief recounted the story of his people's migration down from the northern Great Lakes region centuries earlier.
Yeah, Chief Oconostota claimed that when his ancestors arrived in the region, they found another people already settled there. And these people were apparently so sophisticated they had turned a local mountain into a veritable fortress, which is supposedly how it got its name, Fort Mountain. The Cherokee eventually conquered these people and drove them out. When Governor Sevier asked who this vanquished tribe was, the chief said his forefathers described them as white men from across the Great Sea.
But the chief also explained how they got the name moon-eyed. It wasn't just because of their huge kind of disc-like eyes. It was because they had apparently devolved into these viciously effective nocturnal hunters. Their natural night vision was supposedly so strong that it struck real fear into the hearts of the Cherokee warriors. Governor Sevier was, understandably, stunned and pretty skeptical. But the chief assured him this was no myth, this was their history. Sadly, Chief Ogonostota passed away before his account could be officially recorded and verified.
But even though the chief died, these rumors persisted, and they attracted the attention of a Dr. Benjamin Smith Barton. He was a prominent physician and anthropologist in the late 18th century. His 1797 book, New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America, actually includes an interview with a Colonel Leonard Marbury. Marbury was fluent in Cherokee, and he confirmed hearing stories about these moon-eyed people who, quote, could not see in the daytime and were expelled following a brief but bloody war.
So Dr. Barton initially theorized, okay, maybe these were French settlers. Maybe the Cherokee just miscommunicated when describing their weapons, calling unfamiliar things like guns or metal tools, hoes, and axes. And a lot of people supported that idea, thinking they were maybe just some rogue European settlers hiding out.
But then you have merchant explorer James Adair. He lived among various native tribes for 40 years, really immersed himself, and he strongly refuted Barton's theory. Adair claimed that almost all the Appalachian tribes he encountered had remarkably consistent stories about this primordial race of albino humanoids, always described as stunted, nocturnal, incredibly pale. And what's really intriguing is that most tribes seem to agree on the cause of their strange appearance and habits. They chose to live underground.
Now that sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? Living underground, pale, big eyes. But what's really compelling here is how this seemingly fantastical idea finds this strange echo in modern archaeology. Back in 2003, archaeologists working in Indonesia made a discovery that just stunned the scientific world. They found the remains of a previously unknown human relative, Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit, or the Little Lady of Flores.
Okay.
And this discovery was absolutely groundbreaking because it redefined what we thought was possible for human evolution. She stood only about 3'7" tall, an entirely extinct species of small archaic human.
Exactly. So if the Cherokee migration to Appalachia happened around, say, 12,000 years ago, which is roughly around the time the Flores Hobbit people are believed to have died out, it suddenly becomes, well, maybe not proven, but frighteningly feasible, as one source puts it, that they could have encountered some kind of prehistoric race of subhuman cave dwellers. The very existence of Homo floresiensis proves our ancient human past holds surprises we're still uncovering. It makes the idea of maybe hidden, unique human populations persisting in isolated regions like Appalachia seem far more plausible than just simple folklore.
It really makes you wonder what else is out there undiscovered. Okay, so beyond these ancient legends, the Appalachian Trail still provides plenty of modern-day unsettling experiences too. Take this story from about 10 years ago. A narrator and his college buddy were hiking in East Tennessee. They were hoping to grab some beer after their hike, only to find out they'd landed smack dab in a dry county. No beer anywhere. Then, a stranger approaches them, offers to take them somewhere they can get some real moonshine.
Right, and for them, it wasn't just about getting alcohol, it was about the experience, you know? Getting authentic, locally made moonshine right from the source. So, despite the obvious risks, stranger, remote location, illegal booze, they decided to go for it. He takes them to what turns out to be a motorcycle club's clubhouse. And the atmosphere inside was immediately intimidating, just big, hairy bikers staring daggers at them.
Their new friend goes off to talk to the club president, supposedly to arrange the moonshine deal. And then, just moments later, they hear yelling, crashing sounds of a fight. They see their friend getting beaten up and dragged towards the back. Another big biker steps up and blocks their exit. They instantly thought, okay, our guy got us into deep trouble. He brought strangers here to buy illegal moonshine, and now we're all going to pay.
But then comes the twist. The club president starts yelling at their supposed friend, calling him a dumb POS or rat. He's screaming stuff like, "Are you trying to get us busted? You bring them in here and expect us to... I should drag you back and blow your head off, you rat?" Then he turns to the narrator and his buddy and just yells, "Get the F out!"
So they're initially just hugely relieved, right? They're about to just abandon their friend to whatever fate awaited him. But then the president clarifies. He says, he's not your friend.
Yeah.
He was robbing you.
It turns out the bikers were actually, surprisingly, protecting them. The whole getting busted thing wasn't about selling moonshine. It was about the heat that a robbery or maybe even a murder on their turf would bring down from the law. Once they understood what was actually happening, they didn't hesitate. They dropped the friend like a hot potato and got out of there fast. It's such a strange incident, isn't it? It's a powerful reminder that, our assumptions about who the quote-unquote good guys and bad guys are can be completely flipped upside down in unexpected situations. It sort of highlights this unwritten code that can exist even among groups outside conventional law. Some lines, apparently, like robbing people you brought to your place, just aren't crossed.
Yeah, definitely makes you think. Okay, our final deep dive today into the unexplained is a really chilling personal encounter, just pure, strange fear. The narrator was hiking the Appalachian Trail, woke up around 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom, the outhouse, took a shortcut through a dark wooded trail to get there. As they were walking, they heard this faint sound, almost like someone laughing very quietly off in the trees.
They initially just dismissed it, figuring it was probably just an animal making a weird noise. They kept going, but then a few seconds later, a woman's voice, seemingly deep in the woods, just says, "Hello." Startled them, obviously, but not initially scared, so they just replied, "Hey," then just silence, nothing.
So after using the bathroom, they're trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just another hiker who got spooked by them. They start heading back towards their tent. The trail back was absolutely silent. As quiet as the grave, the narrator says. About 3/4 of the way back to the tent, they heard the voice again. Only it's not her voice. It just sounded like her voice, but it was different in a way that made my skin want to crawl right off my body when it said, "Come back."
Wow, that change? Just the description of it sounding like her voice, but wrong. That's terrifying. The sheer primal terror that hit them then just sent them sprinting. Full tilt back to their tent, woke everyone up in a panic. They couldn't even really explain what they'd heard properly. They were afraid people would think they were drunk or high or just, being a little baby man. Yeah. They packed up and moved campgrounds the very next day. Never heard anything like it again. But that chilling transformation of the voice from an innocent hello to this deeply unnatural commanding come back, it just leaves you with this deeply unsettling question. What was that? What kind of primal, maybe intelligent entity might be lurking in those ancient Appalachian woods capable of such a deceptive, terrifying lure?
It really does. So from the heavy historical burdens of Grapefield's dark past and the horrifying fallout of mob violence to the tragic depths of betrayal in Clinch Valley and that mysteriously reappearing embalmed corpse, and finally to these ancient unsettling legends of hidden humanoids and those truly chilling modern-day encounters in the Appalachian wilds. Wow, this deep dive has certainly unpacked a whole spectrum of mystery.
Absolutely. The Appalachian region, with its deep valleys, its ancient mountains, it clearly holds much more than just picturesque views. It really feels like a landscape where history, personal tragedy, and the truly unexplained just converge. And it leaves us with these enduring questions about what might lie just beneath the surface or perhaps just beyond the tree line.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, perhaps it's a potent reminder. Even in landscapes that feel familiar, there are untold stories, hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. And maybe some mysteries are best left undisturbed. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of the unknown out there is simply undiscovered history, just waiting for us to dig it up? Or does some kind of true darkness really persist in those deep woods? Something to think about.